welcome to Goose Live. I am your host, Charlie Stivers, also publisher of Goose Magazine. And in today's episode is going to be pretty cool. There's a new movie coming out about Bitcoin and all that cool stuff. You know how the media kind of paints the picture of Bitcoin as, kind of being, a big hindrance on our environmental conditions. Some truth in that. Yes, it does take up a lot of energy. There's no doubt about that. But what kind of good is it doing in the world? And where is it driving growth, innovation, all those cool things? So we're going to look at the dirt on this new movie called Dirty Coin. And our guest, I will introduce in just a moment, and we'll be right back. To Goose Live. I'm your host, Charlie Stivers. And today's guest I met through networking. The next issue of Goose Magazine is all about women's leadership in crypto, Bitcoin. And that's very important because, this is a global industry and it's very, very diverse, but it's very male dominant. So wanted to give a safe space to the women leaders in this industry because they're doing amazing things, leading, emerging companies, and they're innovating and they're creative. So it's really interesting, the stories and the people that we're meeting along the way. So I will give a proper introduction to our guest, and it's primarily about Bitcoin. We're going to dig into the pros and cons, all the good and the bad, and reveal some of the dirt. And the title of this is Dirty Coins, Mining for the Truth of Bitcoin. So this is going to be super interesting. So let's get the dirt on a documentary currently in production by Alana Mediavilla, which looks into the controversial Bitcoin mining industry. We'll have a discussion revealing the truths of what Bitcoin mining is doing to the economies around the world, what it's really doing to our energy grid, and how it's affecting our environment. Alana has over 10 years of video production experience combining emerging technology and storytelling with notable clients like Google. So welcome to the show, Alana. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be here with you.
There. Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you. This is kind of round two for us. So, the first one was just kind of, 3 months ago, I think. I'm sure you've come a long way since then.
It's a blur. Yeah, I mean, every month, every conversation is kind of going forward light years, because I've had the pleasure of interviewing a lot of people for the film, and not just any people, but the people moving and shaking this world, the people of this industry. So you can't help but have like one conversation with somebody that, tells you something and you're like, wow, okay, that immediately changes the way that I see things. Like, for example, just this weekend, I was interviewing Paco de la India. He's the Bitcoiner that's been to 33 countries. Puerto Rico is his 33rd country using Bitcoin. And he was telling me that in Zimbabwe, they didn't accept the dollar that he had because it was from prior to 2015, and they only accept. So our dollar already expires. So we're talking about CBDCs expiring, and our dollar is already doing that. So we should be outraged now. And so, that really changes conversations, and that changes the way that I read things and that I see things. So just one little conversation, one little factoid like that really just kind of resonates and pushes me in a different direction, which is cool.
So did you just say the dollar, as in the greenback, expired over there?
Yeah. So they can only accept dollars after a certain year, and if it's prior than that year, they don't accept. They just cannot accept the dollar.
That's crazy. So
Yeah.
It's just more of the times that we're going. So since this is a global industry, I guess maybe tease a little bit of like the places you got to visit, and then we'll make sure that we kind of weave that into how this is all coming about for you.
Well, I have had the pleasure of recording in 4 different continents, and I have done it 2 different ways. Most of the locations I went to myself, and then some of them, like next week, I'm going to be recording Nodal Power in Salt Lake City, and they are mining Bitcoin off methane from landfills. So super dirty, super dirty. They're out there doing it already. So they're not raising money for it, and it's okay if you are, but they're actually out doing it, and they've been doing it. So I'm going to be interviewing them, but I'm not going to go. So I would, set up something like this. I hire a local crew. The crew sets up the camera, sets up the shot, and then I just zoom in like this, and then I ask the questions, and then it's basically exactly this, except I send a crew so that it looks a little nicer for the film.
Yeah, and we had some mutual friends up in Jackson Hole, and so word got back to the Bitcoin meetups here in town that they got to meet you, and they were excited about what's coming. So it's catching on.
It is.
And we're excited to get the word out for you as well.
Thank you.
So what are some of the? Why don't you give us a little bit of premise of the movie? We don't want to give away too much, but definitely tease it.
Well, the movie is only about Bitcoin mining. It is what is proof of work. People are going to understand hashes. They're just going to this is what these computers are doing. The better they get, sometimes they consume more energy, sometimes they don't, because eventually it's going to plateau at some point very soon. There's only so much the chips can do, and so much, so we're going to reach a plateau there in terms of the energy consumption going up of the newer machines, but then the energy consumption of the network as a whole is going to go up because there's just going to be more machines in the market and more people participating in the network. So the reality is that Bitcoin is decentralized, and anybody that has electricity can, plug in a little miner and have a little just dig for gold in their house. And so a lot of remote areas that have, if you have energy, you have access to cheap energy, you have access to cheap Bitcoin, and you mine a Bitcoin for less than it's worth. You can sell all of it. I've met all kinds of miners. Anyway, I feel like I went a little bit on a tangent there because, of course, I'm really interested in this. So I'll leave it at that so that I don't say everything.
No, and I think that's important because, that's the opportunity that we all have in preparing for this digital economy is we can participate, like you said, if you have energy. And so where are you seeing like this innovation in like third world countries or people that are wanting energy or, because they have been deprived of that, but because of Bitcoin and actually creating revenue for countries or regions around the world or even communities, are you seeing kind of just organic growth like that?
Definitely. I mean, it's e-commerce kind of changed things, right? When people could suddenly sell things on Amazon or, become podcasters, or there's all these new kind of ways that you can make money online, because online you could do it where you're at, right? That was one of the main reasons, is that you can do it where you're at and you have clients all over the world. So e-commerce changed the world markets, right? Suddenly we're speaking with people all over the world. We're working on eBay, we're selling, we're buying. And that when that occurred, it inevitably changed things, even if people didn't want them to change. Now, what's occurring is people can make money mining Bitcoin in their country. So, without having to leave. Sorry. So it's a lot like being able to have access to eBay and have access to like cheap stuff at your Walmart that you can sell for a lot of money on eBay. An opportunity like that. Opportunity like that didn't exist before the internet. So now there's no opportunity to monetize your energy the way there is now with Bitcoin. Even if you don't believe in Bitcoin, you can make money. If you can mine Bitcoin affordably, you can sell the whole thing. You don't even need to be a Bitcoiner. So, and that is a way of making money and generating whatever money they need, and more countries are accepting Bitcoin. That's true. There's adoption. And I would say that people like Paco, that he's been specifically carving a path wanting to use Bitcoin. I, with Dirty Coin, was carving a path of the people that are mining it. And you don't always have adoption, like Bitcoin adoption. Like, for example, in Paraguay, I saw one Bitcoin sign, a beautiful Bitcoin sign, but I didn't see any Bitcoin used at all. But I saw a new substation, a new 100-megawatt substation that was financed by Bitcoin miners so that they can mine Bitcoin. They're not using the full 100 megawatts. And so now there's this new electrical node that more factories can plug into, hospitals can plug into, schools, cities. So although there was no Bitcoin adoption, the ripple effects of the Bitcoin miners in Paraguay right now, and there's more coming. There's more incoming. A lot of Bitcoin is going to be mined there. They have a lot of energy, and it's also hydro energy. So it's all, they can all claim to be green because it is. It's hydro. So it's cheap. It's hydro. It's a win-win situation. So even though I would actually love for the people locally to know more, of course, and those are conversations that I have offline with my friends, my Bitcoiner friends. But for the purposes of the film, I was following the whales of mining, and I can tell you that without people even knowing what Bitcoin is, they're being positively affected because these big whales of miners are spending millions of dollars a month on electricity. So when people say it consumes a lot of energy, but like you said earlier, but what makes it good? What makes it good is that it consumes a lot of electricity. It is that you are monetizing electricity that there was no demand for. So there's cheap electricity everywhere, and there's cheap ways of producing new power generation. And Bitcoin mining can monetize cheap energy. So yes, it is inevitable that even if you don't know about Bitcoin, if you live in an area where there's a whale around you, you will feel the effects, and they might very likely could be positive ones. I'm not going to say they're always positive because there's everything, but 3% of the Texas grid is Bitcoin mining. That's a large amount. If they're called to turn off, they can turn off their miners. So I mean, without you even knowing, Bitcoin mining is monetizing that unused electricity on the grid because they're balancing that grid. They're monetizing, they only want cheap energy. And so when they need to turn off, they can turn off, giving the utility extra revenue that they can then help build a better grid that can go into the grid. With the exodus of factories and the exodus of large loads on our grids, and I see that here in Puerto Rico, we had a lot of pharmaceuticals that have closed. The reason why we have so many substations on this island and the reason why we are so electrified is precisely because we had so many factories. There, you can see where the substations are. They're right next to the factories, right? So when the factory leaves, that means that only now the residents and the few small businesses need to carry the cost of a grid that was built for more demand. So, Bitcoin miners come in and they're the ones that buy all the unused croissants at the end of your baking day.
That's a good way of putting it, for the community benefit. I've been like attending more and more Bitcoin meetups in my area, and my conclusion after all this is, and you hit the nail on the head, where people don't realize they can turn off and on or throttle, and it's really like Bitcoin miners are like the perfect customer for these power companies, because if they're surplus, yeah, they're gonna use that, and that creates revenue. But if there's a huge peak or spike, beyond the peak is where they're trying to manage, because power companies manage for peak, and there's always this little gap in between there, and that's where the Bitcoin miners come into play, which is really fascinating. So it does kind of position miners, in my opinion, as like the perfect customer.
They are. I mean, so like exactly what you're saying. That's something that's an interesting thing. I didn't understand that until I started working on this film. Imagine going back to the croissants example, which I've never used the croissants. This is the first time, but I think I'm going to go with it. I have used the Costco example. So let's say you're a baker at Costco, and a grid, a utility, they need to produce as many croissants as they will sell on their most expensive, on their biggest day, on their biggest, like, I don't know what it would be. Like, it's like garlic during Thanksgiving, right? Everybody wants garlic. They need to have that same amount of garlic croissants that they would need for that peak day. The electricity grid, it needs to be that functional. But most of the year they're not that peak day. Most of the year it's a Thursday or a Monday and people aren't buying croissants. It's the first of the year, it's January, and people are on a diet and they're not eating carbs, So but as a baker, if you want to sell just for the 3 croissants you're going to sell that day, you need to make 1,000. Running a utility grid is very expensive. It requires a lot of really smart, specialized people. It has to do with energy production. It has to do with energy transmission. I mean, this is a huge industry, and obviously, right, we live in this electrified world thanks to that industry. But I didn't know that they wasted so much of what they produced. In fact, don't quote me on this number, and I need to have it for the film, which is why I think it's around 60%. But I need to verify this number, or I might be also recalling it wrong. But imagine if 60% of what you produce, which is what utilities, again, asterisk, I might be off here, but the point is that grids waste more than they are able to monetize, than they're able to sell. It gets wasted in transmission lines. It gets just literally burnt, like just grounded, because there's just not demand for that power. So that just means, objectively, that they're making X amount of money and they have X amount of waste. If a Bitcoin miner can come in and consume that waste, then the energy just has that extra customer. Now, if you are a person that likes to bake croissants and you now are selling all of your croissants, maybe you expand and you open up another shop, because now you know that you have a customer that's going to buy all your croissants all the time. And this is something that we saw in Malawi, where Gridless is, they're the anchor tenant for a microgrid that is off hydro. And because they know, the utility owner knows that he is going to have a customer for a based amount of electricity, he is expanding and building transmission lines, and he can now sell the one croissant over here, the other croissant over there, because if you have 200 croissants, the 195 of them Bitcoin is going to consume. And when you tell them to consume 175, which is in the case of what's happening in Gritless, in Malawi and in Kenya, they're working with this energy producer. These are people that never had electricity in their lives, by the way. These are landlocked countries. Malawi is also a landlocked country. So when I hear the left, complaining about it, I'm like I am seeing people that have never had electricity have electricity because Gritless is making it profitable for an electric company to set up shop there and to create the transmission lines. There's a man that we interviewed he's the director of a clinic, and this clinic didn't have electricity. This clinic now has electricity because of Bitcoin. They now have refrigerators for their vaccines or whatever. It's like this is such a win-win-win situation across the political spectrum that it's very interesting to see how it has become politicized between the right and the left when this fulfills a lot of the left goals as well. Bitcoin miners are going in and they're monetizing the vast amounts of wasted energy that renewables are doing in certain parts of the world, making it more profitable, making it easier to then build more renewable. So if you like solar, Bitcoin and solar are a match made in heaven. And if you have energy waste, that's a match made in heaven. If you have methane, any place where there's a lot of energy that's not being used, Bitcoin miner can plug in there and they can scale to whatever. You can put in 2 little machines, or you can put in 2 containers with way more machines. It just scales like little Lego pieces. It's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, and I relate it to, I've always been a techie, and I remember when cell phones and mobile phones came out, and there was this concern in third world countries, they don't have any connectivity. But when mobile phones came out, all they had to do was put up a tower and sell some phones and data service, and they were connected. So it's kind of a pretty cool parallel to that, where these third world countries can catch up very quickly because they don't have that existing infrastructure, and they can just plug in.
Yeah.
So it's cool that you got to see those stories firsthand.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what I saw in Finland, for example, in Finland, they're recapturing the heat. All that energy, all that electricity turns into heat. So we talk a lot about how much electricity it consumes. And I sometimes think that we don't talk enough about how much heat is then therefore created, which is equal, right? 1 megawatt of energy in and 1 megawatt of energy out. The chips do their thing, they burn, they get hot. And so to follow that's why I started the second teaser with Finland, because I feel like everybody knows that I'm going for the, environmental aspect, and they know I'm going to talk about the solar panels, and, they know I'm going to talk about all that stuff. But I feel like what I'm driven to this. Nobody hired me to do this, right? I'm driven to do this because I'm fascinated by this innovative sector that is doing things that nobody has ever done before, and that is allowing people to monetize their energy, which then now we see only a few years in, more than a few years, but way more than a few years, but really at the most maybe 10 years, that bigger kind of miners started coming. But let's say it's 5. In the 5 years, we're already seeing so many new substations and so much new power being harnessed so that they can mine Bitcoin. And that's only going up. The sale of machines is going up, hash rate is going up. So this is not going anywhere. And any country that wants to bolster their electric utility needs to consider Bitcoin. They have to. It is actually their responsibility. And if they don't, they're making a decision strictly off political biases and not off any observation. Because the reality is that it does consume a lot of power, but they can work together with miners to go and consume where you want them to. So the miners don't need to be close to a port. They don't need to be close to high internet transmission lines. They don't need to be they can be anywhere. So when a utility or a country is working with a miner, it is such a match made in heaven, because the miner will do what they need to do, like Gritless will do And I encourage you to interview Eric because he can say it better than me or Janet. But they will do what's proper, what they need to do. They'll move on to the next new microgrid as they continue, as that one, they just scale down, take one machine out at a time, literally like Lego pieces. And it's just so fascinating. And then the fact that you can also turn it into heat means that when you're in cold places, you can use miners to generate that heat. And in Finland, I interviewed one of the directors of heat and energy, not a Bitcoiner. We could not use the word Bitcoin in the interview. But he is calling it data centers, even though in our conversation we discussed that the data centers it's not really data centers, but the reality is that it could become high compute power of some other sort. It could be AI, it could be something else in the future. This is not going away. And so what they're doing is they currently generate heat by burning wood chips, and it's like a truckload of wood chips an hour. So it's a lot of wood chips that go in. So I went to one of those places. The footprint of this heating and electric facility is very large because you need to have all that wood all around and like trucks and like it's a big thing. Now, that's an expensive thing to build. And in Finland, it's cold all year and they need heating all year. And they have the central heating system. Bitcoin miner can be a lot smaller in terms of footprint for not the same amount of output, but for X amount of heat, which would mean that in more remote locations of the country where it's not financially feasible for them to set up this huge node, like what they normally have for more dense areas, they can just put a little miner over there, generate some heat, put some heat pumps, and that miner can then it's decentralizing the heating of their network. I mean, it's so fascinating. And today, Bitcoin miners are just ASICs. They're just computers that do one thing. That's all that they are. And right now we have everything is online. All your photos are online, all your tweets, all your work, all of your stuff is in the cloud. And that's on a computer somewhere, So this is not really going anywhere. And the better we understand the data center industry, the high compute power industry, the better countries understand that, the more honest and real conversations can be had about it.
Yeah, and I think one good conversation to have is how we saw, I think, maybe 2 months ago when ordinals came out, which is like the NFT.
NFTs on Bitcoin.
Yeah, pretty much. A lot of people are excited about it, some aren't. But I guess the point of the story is we saw how transactions were exceeding mining computation.
The block size, yeah.
Yeah. So can you maybe talk a little bit about this, like how in the future when there's less and less Bitcoin to be mined, but we still need the network to conduct transactions?
Yeah. So Bitcoin, the halving is going to come next year and sometime next year. That means that from 6.25 Bitcoin, which is what miners make now per block, you're mining this thing every your hash rate. It's almost like every hash is like a lottery ticket, right? So the more computers you have, the more lottery tickets you have to like win your Bitcoin. And sometimes you pull your hash together with some other folks and then you split the pot, right? And that's what a pool is. It's 6.25 today. That's the block's reward size. They also get transaction fees. People had said that at some point transaction fees will be higher than Bitcoin, than the reward. But it hadn't happened until this year in ordinals. Now, what's interesting is that Bitcoin I already saw last year what happened when Bitcoin went from 60-something thousand to under 20. I mean, wrecked the miners. If you are mining Bitcoin at 24,000, and Bitcoin is at 60, then you're still mining Bitcoin at a great rate because you're still making more than $30,000 on that Bitcoin. But if suddenly Bitcoin goes under 24, whatever the cost is that you're mining it at, then you got to turn off your machines because it's cheaper to go on Coinbase and just buy it, right? than to mine it. So your electrical bill is going to be higher than the Bitcoin that you're getting. So, I saw basically how miners consumed other miners. People had to sell their machines. They also took out loans to buy these miners, and suddenly their profits were cut a lot in a third, right? In a year. So it was a bloodbath. And I'm in the middle of doing this documentary. So I got to see it. Not a terrible bloodbath. I think it kind of reabsorbed and things just kind of, honey badger and all. But it changed. Dynamics changed. Okay. All of this to say that next year it's going to if Bitcoin doesn't go up, or whatever. Okay, next year it's going to go down in half. So we're to now. Right now it's a squeeze. Next year it's three Bitcoin and I don't know something. Right, it's half. It goes down in half. It's from 6.25 now. That's going to squeeze out even more miners, and it's going to centralize the network further because the people that can afford to weather it, then they can weather it, and the people that can't won't be able to. So for those moments, it's going to centralize the system. And if transaction fees, and I'm not technical enough on Bitcoin network, the network. I believe Bitcoin is money in a big way. So kind of what gets built on Bitcoin. I'm not the technical person to know if Bitcoin should be the place to do that in or not. I have friends that can answer those questions, but from a miner's economics perspective, if the value of Bitcoin doesn't go up in dollar size because they're paying for their electricity in dollars. I know one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin, but your electricity bill is in dollars. If Bitcoin doesn't make it financially feasible for them to stay on, we already know they're going to make their profits. They're going to cut down their profits in half. A lot of people are not going to survive this, and it's fine. It'll move. And again, honey badger. So transaction fees would be a great way to still make it profitable to mine and continue to keep the mining industry profitable. So I guess that's my viewpoint on it, is that I don't really know enough about the technical side, how that will affect the block sizes. And, I try to keep up with the Twitter spaces, but right now I'm talking more about substations than I am about ordinals, So I'm kind of on a different path, but I can say from a financial perspective, if things stay the same by next year, there's going to be some miners that are just not, or maybe some people will still continue, but I think there's going to be a lot that is, at least objectively, it will just not be profitable to mine.
Yeah. And like we said, they can just shut down or unplug for a little bit until, it's timing is right. So along your journey, did you get to go to El Salvador? I can't remember, because that's kind of an interesting story as well.
No, I feel like in the Bitcoin community, El Salvador is covered so much that I almost felt it didn't need to get covered again by me. I know that my film is kind of for a different public, but I also really know who my film is for. And I'll be very honest, they don't like Bukele. It doesn't have the right reputation. And I know exactly who I'm making this movie for. I studied marketing, right? So I didn't actually even study it. I studied it in my career. I worked with marketers, brilliant marketers, and we were laser focused to one person that we were making our films for. And it ended up being a very successful strategy because that one person kind of exists across every country, across every place. It's a persona. And so I feel like I prefer to speak that way. And that person has their reservations, and when you tell them about Bitcoin, they're like, oh yeah, that Bukele guy lost a lot of money or whatever. He's become this pawn, unfortunately, from a marketing and public relations perspective about how it's not working. Now, us in the community, we understand the value and how incredible it is and all of that. But I almost feel like that's imagine that church that's a little too intense. You don't take your friends first to that church. You take them to the lighter one. And then if they're interested, then you take them to a little bit more hardcore church. I feel like that's how I see it. So for me, my movie is for very, very misinformed people that want to know, but they're currently misinformed. And I felt that if I flashed certain faces, they were gonna know what the film was about. And I also would rather just kind of focus on so many other stories that are occurring in the world. And then once they get pumped about Bitcoin, they can find all the El Salvador stories and movies that they want, because there's a bunch of Bitcoiners doing it. And I applaud them, and I will forward the people that like it down to them or over to them.
Yeah, that's a good point. So would you say your avatar is primarily people who are misconceived and they do want to learn more and
They're curious.
get a different perspective?
Yeah, it's just people that are
Yeah,
curious. Because I was curious, I
yeah.
saw I knew the same dirty coin mainstream stuff. Like I've heard the same stuff they have, and I also wanted to know, because as a Bitcoiner, I saw the value of money without borders, of separating money and state. I was like, I like this, especially in an online world. Totally makes sense. The cypherpunks totally like these were, you know, these are pillars of what I believe is important in life. I believe privacy is important, property is important, and Bitcoin is property online. So, but the mining side, I didn't really know enough about that. It was just like, oh yeah, and then they mine, and then it kind of goes like this. And I had this like rote answer, when people would ask me. But I was curious, and I want the person that I'm making this movie for. Obviously, Bitcoiners are going to be like, all right, let's see it. Let's see what she did. Let's see if it was any good. But the person that I'm making this for is not a Bitcoiner. Maybe they've bought Bitcoin, maybe they don't, maybe they haven't, but they're kind of curious. They keep seeing in the news, they hear the buzz. But one thing they have heard is that it consumes a lot of energy, and we are like, they know that. And I kind of want to take advantage of that, because that is precisely what is that capital, all of that energy it consumes, all of that capital, all of that demand, is going towards unused energy. And, that's where your opinions on sources of energy, which one is good and which one is bad, changes. Because cheap energy can be your oil field in your backyard that wasn't profitable enough to like make, sell all of it. But now you can put a little generator there and you can that's cheap energy, right? You have your own.
Mhm.
So it can be that. And if you think that that's dirty, then, it is going to encourage that too. But in some countries that have that, like South America, there's several countries that have, and they can, why can't they do what we did to become the country that we became today? Why do we tell them no now when we built our empire off it? So I feel, whether you think it's dirty or not, just for me, I'm like, well, these guys didn't have electricity and they do now. And how are they going to compete with the world? We're already here. It's easy for us to say. And then we're over here saying that renewables are good. And we've seen that renewables are not, you have to make them in a place where there's a ton of carbon being produced. They have to be shipped. They have to be trucked. I mean, it's, but then yet that's clean. For me, my opinion doesn't matter. I can tell you that all cheap sources of energy, whether they're green or not, can now be monetized. And that's going to it's going to monetize something that there was just no demand for. And that usually changes things when suddenly there's demand for something that there wasn't before. It creates new industries. So this film is just as much about the energy industry as it is about Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I think a fascinating real picture of that, or how you see the globe at night, and it shows how it's lit up, and it's really cool, or I wouldn't say cool, but it's fascinating to see how the places that aren't lit up are third world countries, and where's there going to be additional lights on this picture of the globe in the future because of Bitcoin?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, opinions are opinions, like whether it's good or bad or clean or dirty, or I mean, whether they have the right to put more carbon in the air and we say what's the right source of carbon. I mean, all of that is going to come out, all of it. But
Yeah.
I'm just happy that we're giving the global south a chance for the first time, because without electricity, as a person whose power goes out a few times a week, you are suddenly in the dark ages. The internet will only last for a little bit longer and you're kind of out. You can't participate in Twitter spaces, podcast videos, work interviews, Zooms. You can't do any of that. So, to be able to give the global south an opportunity for the first time, and not just the global south, but even in the United States, there's energy poverty, even in the United States, many places. So to be able to, it's like a huge factory moving into town. It's a big deal from an electrical perspective. This is kind of stuff that used to be celebrated. And because it's a client, it's a big client it's a client, it produces jobs. Now, one of the criticisms of Bitcoin then, when they can't when they realize they can't criticize the energy, they say, well, it doesn't make as many jobs. In a way, it's kind of great because that's why it can be so remote, and you can put it wherever, like it's part of what makes it actually valuable is that you don't have people coming in and out of this. It's like a little trailer that just goes meh, and that's all that it's doing, and you may have a few site visits here and there, but for some areas, like for example in Malawi, they don't want to have a lot of people coming in and out. This is a very remote village. And when outsiders come, it really upsets the balance of, and they can, it's not like they can't, but they don't want to have 100 people coming in and out. They want it to be something that's small. So it's small, but it consumes as much of a large thing. And in cases like that, I think that's extremely positive. I went to a mine that was close to a residential area in Paraguay. If you're in a residential area, do you want to have 100 new in place? Again, I'm not against factories. Of course, they're great. They're jobs, but that's not always what you want in every situation. And that is just one of the assets or attributes of Bitcoin that you can use either for it or against it, I guess. But I mean, that would be a weak argument if we're against it. But they are against it. They do say that.
So soon after we chatted about 3 months ago, going to another Bitcoin meetup, I met a gentleman who is launching a whole modular mining units out of shipping containers. And I thought that was a fascinating model. And he was saying how, starting up through Texas in the middle of the US, there is a huge surplus of energy because it's mostly solar and wind, and it's less population. So now these modular units are starting to position themselves in areas with surplus energy. Did you come across any of those stories?
Yeah. I mean, that's where the miners want to be, because to feel that squeeze, let's talk about again that halving sorry, thought I had quieted that, but I guess I didn't. Next year, they're going to make like half as much Bitcoin as this year. If they're not, remember going back to those profits, if you're mining Bitcoin for cheap, you can take that squeeze. So anybody that was mining Bitcoin under 3 cents, 4 cents, they were fine because they were still mining Bitcoin at $10,000, $11,000. So when it went down to 16, they were still making 4K off. I mean, again, I'm throwing these numbers very casually out there. Obviously, it changed. Everybody had a different number. It all depends on their cost of electricity, when they bought the miners, the efficiency of the miners. So it's a tough question to say specifically, but that was kind of the average that I got from a lot of the miners that were still alive. They were the ones that were mining off cheap or free or negative energy, because even in Texas, there are some areas where ERCOT will pay you to consume electricity because they have so much of it. They have so much surplus that they need you to keep the grid healthy to please use it. So that's interesting, right? So some miners were even mining off that. So those guys, they can weather the storms. And I think that is a lesson for big miners to take with them is, and I think a lot of people have been scared enough times with Bitcoin going up and Bitcoin going down, the cheapest free or negative energy that you can consume, the more you can do that, the better. And yes, so I did see that. I saw that connected to all kinds of sources of energy. And like I said, it's like a Lego. So they'll consume as much as needs to get consumed. It's really how fast can you get the miners there? And then you can plug in. Sometimes you need to put a generator and stuff. But yeah, that's definitely happening. And we need that. I mean, we need more sources of electricity, whether it's solar, whether it's gas. I mean, now we get into another political conversation, but we really need to be thinking about how to handle our energy crisis, energy poverty. And I guess we don't really need to. I guess those who do will be successful, and then those who don't will fail. That's it.
Yeah, it's almost like it's the new knock on, the oil companies going around to the big farmers with a lot of land and asking to drill on there. But now the miners can go in and say, hey, we can do a rev share if you let us put a modular unit on your property.
That's right.
So, yeah.
That's
That's
right.
pretty cool.
And I have seen that as well. And what that's doing, like there's this miner in the Netherlands where he installs heaters at greenhouses or different locations like offices and stuff too. And he'll give them the heat. He'll say, I'll use your electricity. You need to use less natural gas. The heating in this particular greenhouse was a natural gas heater. With the Ukraine-Russia crisis, the cost of natural gas went up. So, but the grid electricity is wind and considered renewable in Norway, like renewable energy. And so he then, by him plugging into the electricity to power the computers that generate a bunch of heat, they then can use less natural gas for the central heating system. So he is helping them reduce their carbon emissions just by installing his computers and having the heat of the miners just heat the greenhouse. So it's helping offset that. So I mean that's another use, and they're also splitting. And I don't want to say this for all of his customers. I don't know. I know at this point he's doing it with a lot of different people, but they were splitting it with the farmer. So, during a time, the lockdown and the time where they grew tulips there, where people weren't going to parties, they weren't stopping by the store to buy tulips. I mean, so many industries were affected. And for them to be able to monetize their electricity to create Bitcoin was also a great way to also offset just the fact that their industry had also been affected. So, very, very cool stuff.
So we're getting close to the end. Why don't you give us a little bit of what to expect with the movie, timing wise? How can we see it? Those types of things.
Well, I have been raising private capital to produce this film, and contrary to what some people believe, we only have one large miner that has sponsored, very modestly has sponsored, just considering, by the way, not, oh my God, I feel terrible for having said modestly, but not a big funder, okay? I don't mean that in a bad way, but they didn't send me to make this film. Like I was already making it, and last month they sent me a very grateful check, but not a very large one. Anyway, this has not been funded by the big miners. I have maybe like 4 miners that are private miners that are investing in the film. The big miners have not supported it except for Marathon. Marathon did. That was the company that gave me that check that I said was modest, but was not modest, and I'm very grateful for. This has been just a lot of different people that see how I'm telling the story and believe that this is going to be the way that we can help change minds. And so I'm really grateful for the people that have joined. And it's been just a lot of small, and not so small and not so small contributors to the film. But I still am raising funds. So without the funds, unfortunately, that it just extends my timeline, because then I can't pay for the animator to do the animations. I can't pay for the colorist. I can't pay for the stuff. Like the film costs a certain amount of money. So I am currently still raising. We just had 2 new signatures yesterday, so we have, it's happening. But I would like to have the film done by October. I'm definitely starting to feel a squeeze and looking at the calendar and pushing out the date, because I need to be able to, I can't hold these people. These are very professional, incredible people that I don't want to hold for a long time and not, hire them. So the illustrator, for example, Chris, he is incredible. Thank you for pulling up that art. He is going to be illustrating, and we're going to create kind of like a graphic novel style animation explaining the history of Bitcoin prior to Bitcoin. Where I have the script already for all these scenes, because we start at the beginning. We start with, how all the technologies that came together to form Bitcoin. And so Chris is our illustrator, and then I have an incredible animator as well. And Yeah. And so I want to get these guys paid. I want to finish my race. So if anybody's interested in either donating, they can go to our Geyser campaign. They can donate in Bitcoin. They want to invest and they're an accredited investor. They can talk to me directly. But we already have film festivals that are asking us for the film, which I'm so excited. I mean, I'm going to apply for the big ones, but to have film festivals kind of approach us and tell us like, hey, we want to show this in Wyoming. Actually, I don't know. Are you in Wyoming?
Colorado.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so Wyoming is one of the, I don't think it's in Jackson Hole, but there's a film festival in Wyoming, and they want to host our film. There's a couple of film festivals in LA, San Jose, where I was in for a long time. So it's starting to feel really real. There's a demand starting on the other end of people that really want to watch it. And so this is July, by the way, by the time I'm doing this. And so I really want to be done by October and then just start submitting to film festivals so that our winter 2023 and Q1 of 2024, we can like do the rounds and then just show the film to people and then have conversations about it after, let's see what the reporters say.
Yeah, possible awards. That would be very cool and much deserved. And I think quite the shocker for a lot of people too. So that would be interesting.
Yeah.
And one of our I guess high level producers documentary was the last name was Shadden, and they produced The Cove. So they were, that was our local, kind of cool story with a documentary movie that actually won an Emmy. So
Oh crap! Nice.
could be a good connection there.
Yes,
We'll see what we can do
yes.
locally for you.
I feel like I've been just asking people for stuff from the very beginning. It's been like, either give me money or give me access. Tell me who's in Paraguay doing this. Tell me who, it's been, and even though, I spoke about the people that have invested or donated, I need the money. We need to pay people. But just the people that have also helped out, it's numerous people that have made introductions, people that have opened doors for us, people that have paid for the shoot, or, there have been so many people who have like really contributed to this film, that including the big miners, by the way, that have like giving me footage. Like Riot sent me a ton of B-roll that we could use, which I don't have to then pay to shoot, right? So he already had all the B-roll. He sent it to me. So there have been so many ways that people have been like, it's just the community. You have proof of work. And at this point, I've been working on this for over a year. So people that have followed it from the beginning, they've seen the work that has gone into it. And proof of work counts for a lot, and to build during a bear market also counts for a lot.
I feel you there.
Yeah. So anybody that's around is somebody that like really just wants to be here. They're weathering the storms. They still see the benefit. And I am very gracious and grateful very grateful for people like you, Charlie, that have given me the opportunity to just talk about the film and, the people that have opened their doors so we can film there. And then, the festivals that will have us next year. And then hopefully to a theater or a streamer near you.
Yeah, that would be so cool to see it in the theater. But, I think
at the festivals, at least.
Right?
That's where I visualize it in the theater, just at the festivals. But hey, you never know. I mean, right now, Sound of Freedom is an independently produced film by Angel Studios, and they're playing here in Puerto Rico in the local Juncos theater, and I'm actually going to go see it with my friend. So. Who knows? That in terms of the distribution, I will trust our distributors that know what they're doing. They might be like, no, this is not a good fit. That's what I'm expecting them to say. But maybe there's a few regions in the United States that kind of has my persona, New York City, San Francisco, cities like that maybe they would feel excited about, watching it in their local kind of indie theater.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's gonna be some cool stories, and you never know, it might come out of nowhere and just catch on. Like, what is it? The sound of? I just forgot the last word.
Sound of Freedom.
Sound of Freedom. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it all depends on how much we end up spending on publicity. You know, Sound of Freedom has spent a ton of money on publicity. So it'll depend on the partners that we have. Currently, this is super indie. So it's been a lot of favors, is what has gotten this done. But in order to reach that kind of mainstream success, it's not favors. At that point, you gotta actually put money behind it.
People.
Yeah. So, you know, you have to have a good product, and then you have to have good publicity. So, you know, we'll see what the publicity gets us, but at least from a cult following perspective, I believe that I've been also to enough countries that I would want to do film festivals at, and with enough of the crypto buzz around it, I do believe that it's going to still be entertaining, very niche, but riches in the niches, right? I don't know. Maybe that works in our favor.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We're super excited on the progress you've made and the story that you're going to get to share with all of us who are very curious. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we'll catch you next time on Goose Live.